Good evening. This is the December 1st regularly scheduled policy committee meeting for the Board of Education. It is 6 p.m. and we will begin the meeting. So first of all, let me just read through, which of course my computer has stopped. Thank you. Oh, yep, thank you. Give me 1 second. Okay. So Governor Pritzker moved Illinois into Phase 5 related to the COVID-19 pandemic for all Illinois counties. In accordance with Board Policy 2.230, members of the public may provide public comment at the meeting. The public will be allocated up to 3 minutes per speaker. The board president has set 30 minutes as the length of time for public comment for the public comment section of the meeting. The board meetings will be continued to be live streamed for viewing on the district website. Electronic public viewing can be found at Board Docs by clicking the video button. All right. Tonight's meeting is a public meeting of the Policy Committee for the Board of Education, where we, as a representative of our entire community, conduct the board's business in public. Part of the public process is the allocation of time to hear from members of our community during public comments. Public comment is an opportunity for community members to speak regarding items on this agenda, communications, petitions, and reports. Public comment is not a place to discuss specific students and/or employees, even if referenced in a positive manner. We have established a chain of command, which is available on the D205 website and provides context within the organization for community members to reach out with specific questions or concerns, including those regarding specific students and/or employees. Public comments from those in our community are valued and considered as we make decisions. Please know that we will listen intently to the comments presented, but will not respond at this time. If a follow-up conversation is deemed necessary, you will be contacted by members of the board or the administration. The following process is in place to provide a fair opportunity for each of our speakers. It is expected that each speaker, as a representative of our community, be respectful and courteous when sharing your comments. 30 minutes have been allotted for all in-person public comments. Please provide your name when you come to the podium. You have up to 3 minutes to speak. I will alert you when there is 30 seconds left. Okay, so we are now calling the meeting to order at 6:03 p.m. Let's stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. So I have one speaker that signed up for public comments. So Hillary Reif, if you'd like to come up with your comments. Give me 1 second to set up your time and just make sure that green button is on. Do you see it on?
No, it's a different one.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, yeah, it's green.
It's okay. All right, hold on 1 second so I can get your timer set. And you may begin when you're ready.
So I'm Hillary Reif. I have 2 students in D205, a 7th grader at Sandburg and a freshman at York. I am in opposition of the mask mandate given the negative implications it is having on our children's overall well-being. However, I also acknowledge there are others here tonight or listening online who support mask mandates and have the same motivation I have, our children. For those of you who support masking, I ask that you Google Governor Pritzker, November 7th, drinking beer, and look at that picture closely. I wish I had it blown up, right? These men do not appear to be fearing for their lives. They do not appear to feel as though they are putting one another in danger of their own lives. They're, in fact, having a grand time, right? Based on their age alone, their risk factors for COVID are astronomical compared to any of our children. And then let's layer in the comorbidities that I'm pretty willing to bet many of them have given their weight and age, okay? While COVID positive rates will go up this flu season, We need to start to understand how we intend to move forward. This is a flu, and it will likely become more contagious, but symptom severity appears to be going down. As an example, the latest, whatever, not the moronic, but whatever they're calling the new wave, right? They're already stating symptoms minimal, no loss of taste, no loss of smell. And COVID has always been less deadly to children than even the regular flu. In addition, anyone that wants a vaccine to further reduce symptoms has access. Therefore, I ask the board and administration to add hospitalizations and/or deaths of children to the dashboard and allow severe symptoms to be our new gauge of concern and the only hurdle for a true return to normal. I ask this as a parent that is not without experience of severely ill children. I spoke earlier this summer regarding my son's bout with bacterial pneumonia and pleural effusion, which
30
is
seconds.
fluid surrounding the lungs. My daughter, during past flu seasons, would succumb to croup, which led to numerous races to the ER and/or ambulance dispatches for her inability to breathe. No classmate that came to school was ever made to feel like they caused her trips to the ER and/or put her life at risk. They were never told they were not compassionate, not respectful, and had no empathy for their peers, ever. It was on us to keep her home at the slightest sniffle, knowing her disposition for this affliction. I am asking that we allow our children to be free to enjoy one another's company without the fear of causing great harm to one another, just as those I showed you the picture of. These children mentally think they are walking killers. My daughter had COVID, burst into tears 4 times day 1 and day 2. Why? Because she thought we were going to start getting calls of people she cared for truly dropping dead. Burst into tears. That was it.
Thank you very much.
No other symptoms.
Thank you for your time. All right, so that's the only person that's signed up for public comments. So we will move on to the approval of the policy committee meeting from June 2nd, 2021. Does anybody recommend or want any changes to those minutes as they stand? No. Minutes will stand as presented. Okay, so now we will move on to the policy committee discussion topics. We've broken it down on the agenda by sections. First, I just want to start out by saying I really appreciate, the community might know, but we began a new process of how we are going to handle the policy committee meetings. It's mostly an internal process that gives timelines for just, understanding what the press recommendations are that we should be following and how those work within our own district and our own community. And I just appreciate the fact that all the work that was put in by the admin team that leading up to this meeting, because there's a lot of information here and I really do appreciate the time that was put into it. Okay, so that being said, we will start with policy 110, school district legal status. And so, let's see. So usually, Dr. Campbell, what we have is the person, the administrator that's supposed to review it, is the one to point. I'll just kind of point out what the press recommendations, the changes are. And I think basically what I've noticed in this one is it literally changes the word school board to Board of Education. Is there anything more that we need to know about that?
No, that is correct. Just changing the word school board for the Board of Education is highlighted within the policy.
Great. And again, this is part of the newly implemented 5-year review that we will now start to follow quarterly with their updates.
Yes.
Is there any discussion on this topic other than that? Beth, would you like to move this policy forward to the board?
Yes.
Okay. This policy will be moved forward to the next regular board meeting. Okay.
Okay.
Moving on to 120, the district organization operations and cooperative agreements. This is also a 5-year
5-year
review.
review.
And the press recommendation is simply to eliminate some wording. Let's see. Eliminate the statement, the district participates in the following joint programs and intergovernmental agreements. I'm assuming that we're taking it out because we don't participate?
Because it's already in the press copy, it's already included in the.
Already included.
Yes, yeah. So basically, we've just clearly stating Elmhurst Community Unit School District 205, and we're taking out pre-kindergarten through 12, because that's included in Elmhurst School District Unit.
Great.
Also classifies those grades, but no, that is also in the first sentence, the district enters into and participates in joint programs and intergovernmental agreements.
Great. Any discussion about this topic, this policy? Beth, would you like to move this forward?
Yep.
Okay. Mrs. Hostler, Mrs. Troutman agreed to move this forward. Sorry, I didn't mention those two votes or votes moving forward. All right, next one is 130, School District Philosophy. This is also a press 5-year review. Dr. Campbell?
Yes, this is a press 5-year review. We are recommending that we adopt press copy. As you will notice in our original policy, you will see that there is a vision, mission, as well as the beliefs that is stated. We're recommending at this time that we do not include that in the anticipation of us entering into some strategic planning coming in the spring, and that at that time, once there is agreed upon and shared involvement around the vision, mission, and values, that we would then update that policy to include it at that time.
Do we make a note of that somewhere just so that we remind ourselves to bring this policy forward again once we're done with that work as a policy committee?
Yeah, I think that's a good idea
Yes,
because
that's really
when
good.
that strategic planning happens in the spring or the next summer, I think it'll be important for us to look at this and reconsider. I mean, we're adopting the press policy. Is basically what we're doing right now, but we may want to take another peek at it to see if there's more 205 specific information that we want to put in there.
Can I ask a question? So the proposed policy here, 130, that was supplied to us, though those exact words were supplied to us from the press service.
Yes,
Yes.
Thanks.
all right. Anything else?
And that's been noted to move to, for us to review once again after the conclusion of the strategic planning process to
Great, thank you.
personalize.
All right, Mrs. Hostler, would you like to move this to the full board?
Yes, please.
Same here. All right, moving on to 210, which is the school district governance. This is also a 5-year review for press, and it looks like that there is, looks like legal references and cross-references are updated. Is there anything in the body of the policy that, of note, Dr. Campbell?
No, there isn't. It's the full adoption. We just, the inclusion of the words that were included in the press added to ours, and we recommend that we adopt as presented.
I think this just adds that we would be able to have a quorum that is not physically present if we are in a state of emergency. I
Correct.
think that was a change made
Yep,
to this
agreed.
particular policy.
All right, any further discussion? Okay, Mrs. Hostler, would you like to move this forward to the board? Same here. Policy 210 to be brought to the next consent agenda, first reading. Policy 220, powers and duties of the school board. It looks like, once again, this is a 5-year review of this policy, and we are adopting the press notes, which seems to be just policy and cross-reference updates.
That is correct.
Is there any substantive changes within our policy compared to the press other than the cross-references?
So did the press service suggest that item number 16, visiting district facilities, be deleted?
Yeah, that was not included in the press. We know that the board visit facilities as necessary through the activities. And so That was number 16 in the press, in our personal, but in full adoption, we excluded it just because it wasn't in the press.
Personally, I think we should leave it in.
Well, the only thing I would question is whether or not that makes it a requirement and how consistently we all do that. So, let me see, what, does it,
And there is, I mean, I just want to also note that that doesn't mean
Yeah.
that it does not happen. It says that these are the powers and the duties that are included, but not limited to. So, what are thoughts on that?
Yeah, I just think we should just leave it in.
Right, because it lists, that's what I just read, it lists that the major powers and duties of the school board include, but are not limited to.
I mean, the district has a major investment in facilities. And we are, the school board is the elected, what is the word I'm looking for? Caretakers or fiduciaries of those facilities. I just think it would be a good message to the public if we just left it in.
and what would the message be? I guess is my question, because the public, or at least our building principals and our admin teams, see board members at their buildings and see them involved in the discussions regarding facilities and the decisions made regarding the facilities. So I guess I'm just I'm struggling with what message would be.
Well, that the board is the steward of the community's investment in property, plant, and equipment.
Yeah, agreed. I mean, I think that, that would come under number 5, approving the annual budget, tax levies, major expenditures, payment, et cetera, other aspects of the district's financial operation. I mean, I think, yeah, I mean, Mrs. Hostler, do you have an opinion about it?
Well, as school board members, we do visit district facilities. I don't know that, maybe it's just the way that it's worded. I don't know if there's another area that talks about, I was just reading through the others to see if there was another bullet point that,
Yes,
Yeah, I was looking at
7.
So the overall purpose of this policy, as I understand it, is to clearly enumerate in the board policy handbook the powers and duties of the Board of Education as espoused by state and federal law. So you see things in here like establishing the school year, establishing attendance units, those sorts of things. And because of the fact that visiting district facilities is not something espoused by state law, that is why it is not in the press policy, and why it's not listed overall there. So these are all things that are,
so it's not necessarily a requirement.
It's not a requirement
But it
of
is
state law.
something that we do as a school board.
all
that-
of these other things are required by state law of boards of education. It's a power of a Board of Education. Anybody on the Board of Education can go and visit a district facility on, there's a process that
Yep.
anybody can do that. But it's not a power
And
or a
I
duty.
think that's the important distinction in the press update, right? Is making sure that we differentiate between what we should be doing, which I think this Board of Education is very involved in our buildings and in our buildings all the time, with what we must do, so.
Well, maybe it just fits better in a different area in our governance procedures and how we operate as a board team. I know that's part of what we've discussed, and that is in those documents. So maybe it just fits better under there than it does under this topic with state requirements.
You can find another place to put it. I'm good with that. I would just hate for you to be told by some future superintendent that you're not allowed in the building.
Thank you for clarifying future.
I do want to emphasize that. Yes.
And once again, if that ever presented itself to us, that could certainly be something that we could address at that time. But I do think, I feel after looking at this policy manual quite a bit in the last few months, I do think it's important, unless there's a strong reason, that we take a strong look at what press is recommending us to do and what our policies are, because this will dictate what happens everywhere across the district. So I don't want to get caught up in what we should be doing versus what we must be doing. And I think Kevin actually presented a very good, like, understanding or, background of why they've recommended this policy, or why we should update it to the press version. All right, so Mrs. Hostler, would you like to move this forward?
Yeah, I agree with that. I think the way it reads, it should stick to the state guidelines, but I just think that as a board team, we can make sure that we have that language in or elsewhere in our operating procedures.
And again, I think the community sees us out there, especially, this school year. I don't think there's a building I haven't been in yet, and it's such a pleasure to be out there. So I think they see us out there and they recognize that's the fun part of the job.
Yeah, right, any chance we
So,
can.
okay, I agree with you, Mrs. Hostler, moving that to consent agenda 220. All right. Next one is 230, school district elections. The only thing I thought about, this is about adopting the press update that campus. Okay, so this, because I know at the school board, the delegates meeting, Beth, there was a new resolution passed, so this doesn't fall within here, right? That's what I was worried about this, because at the delegates meeting, and you should speak to that since you were there in our vote, that they've changed the amount of time before a newly elected board member is actually sat or sworn in for the school board. So does that impact
I think
these
that's
changes?
about the reorganization of the board. I think this is just, the canvass of votes is conducted by the election authority within 21 days after the election. So what the resolution was about was more time to be able to reorganize,
Have them sworn in.
and president, vice president, secretary roles, deciding on those things.
Okay.
So that they wouldn't have to have a special meeting, add a special meeting in order to do that work.
Okay. So, let's see. So what is our policy? So we're just adding in the canvass of votes is conducted by the election authority within 21 days after the election. The canvass.
Which is in the other policy.
I know, that's what I don't understand. Yeah, Dr. Campbell, do
Dr.
you
Green,
see what the difference, Dr.
Grants,
Grants?
did you have any?
Because that red
difference?
statement on ours is in the,
The 21 days piece. Is that what you're referring to?
yeah,
I think it was more so removing the board's election duties statement. And more so stating that the board may cause to be placed on the ballot. I think the 21 days is on both. If I'm
okay,
correct.
that's why I was confused. So it shouldn't be in red on ours, because it's already there.
Correct.
You're not asking for that to be removed, correct?
If I can clarify, that first document, that has the date up at the top, that is your press.
I know.
So, okay, and then I don't believe on our policy, the last page, the canvass of votes was ever included in our policy,
Right,
so that's
right,
why
right.
it's red. Because we're adding it to the policy.
And
Unless you
But
see it
why is our
someplace.
policy that, over something that we have zero, the election authority? The canvass of votes is conducted by the election authority within 20 days. I hate for our policy to be dependent on somebody else's action. Am I reading that wrong, interpreting it wrong, somebody? Anybody? I'm open to,
It refers on the bottom that the board may, it refers to the PR function, and maybe it's just about us providing information to the community.
all right, so I think, so there's,
In the footnotes, number 7.
right, oh, number 7.
on the press.
Right, so
version.
that has to do with the second paragraph. I'm worried about adding in the statement, the canvass of votes is conducted by the election authority within 21 days of the election. And that's the fifth footnote, and it says the appropriate election authority, whether it's the county clerk or election committee, must canvass the school for school district elections, must canvass the vote within 21 days. Am I the only one that feels uncomfortable about us having in our policy that somebody else has to do something that we have zero control over? Am I reading it wrong? I don't know, somebody.
Is that the press recommendation wording?
Yeah,
It is, I was incorrect. Yeah, it is to add on.
I just,
So the press also, the press service, their attorneys also coined the catchy phrase, "may cause to be placed on the ballot."
okay.
I don't know if it helps, but when you look at the footnote of 5, it refers to several school codes or Illinois law. I'm not sure which those numbers refer to. I
No,
believe they're
but-
Illinois
But
law.
also, to Kathy's point, in that number 5, it says, the fifth footnote says, within 28 days after the consolidated election, boards must hold an organizational meeting, and that is what was changed at the delegation meeting, right? That's now 40 days.
Well, let me just double check on that because.
And I believe,
A recommendation, so that's not something that happens right away.
Right, right, but I'm just saying, like, it seems like this is,
I can
it-
let, sorry.
Was passed.
I can let you know that there's another press release 108 that I am currently working on. So that, and I don't have that information here. So that may be one of the policies.
Should we?
I would like, yeah, let's.
Can you
let's
look it
pull
up,
this one.
Kevin?
Let's pull this one and like just get some more. I'm just concerned about, like what I've already said. Us being accountable for somebody else doing something that we have no authority about them doing.
In Press 107, it says that it's just the footnotes that are updated, so I'm wondering if the board didn't update it the last time in 2014, and it was supposed to have been updated, but I don't have access to that right now, so.
Yeah,
I think.
yeah, so let's pull this one and take another look at it with 108 in our next meeting. I mean, it does not impact us. We'll have a meeting before our next election. Oh, we have nobody. We have nobody running. So we have a lot of time before there's nobody, no school board members are
Right,
running
right.
in the
We have
next
plenty of
election.
time
So we
to
have plenty of
review
time to
this,
get that one
and
right.
If there's changes from IS.
Yep. Okay, moving on to 2-130, Board Superintendent Relationship. This is also a 5-year review with policy updates. Dr. Campbell? I just leave them on because it's just us really talking.
Okay. So we are recommending that we adopt Press's policy. What it really highlights is that the school board directs through the policy myself and provides my authority is given to me and delegated is the word to operate the district and provide the leadership to the staff. So that is included in there. We, in alignment also with that, we are recommending that the request for information by individual board members of the Board of Education shall be directed to the superintendent. If this information is not provided, the board member may request a majority vote of full membership to direct that information be provided by the superintendent. That is not inconsistent and in alignment with the press policy, and so in our adoption, adding that language of the delegation of authority to the superintendent and individual requests by board members, which again aligns to our adoption of our board norms that are already in place.
Yeah, I think that's an appropriate deletion of what our policy looks like because our board norms talk about that, right? And I don't think it should be part of policy, but certainly identified within our board norms and also with the new, what are you calling, chain of
chain of command,
command, you know, how, you know, information should be accessed by not just us, but by every community member. So I think that's more consistent.
Are you interested in a little historical perspective?
Always love historical
I
perspective.
believe that was put in by a previous board because a board member continued to ask for information and the superintendent flatly refused to provide it.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, listen, I always, if there's a rule or a policy, it means something happened to create it, in my opinion. So
There's a
there's
reason.
always a reason. So I think that with our new board norms, with our superintendent, I think that that sufficiently identifies how the exchange of information between the board and the superintendent and the district. So I am comfortable with moving this forward.
And the chain of command.
And the chain of
That's
command,
just
right,
been put
I
in
love
place,
that
yeah.
chain of command, it's very clear for the community to know exactly where to go to with questions or concerns or issues they have, and that's the same for us, because we're community members as well.
Yep.
Anything, Beth?
Nope.
All right, any further discussion? All right, I move that 130 get brought to consent for the full board meeting. All right, next one is 240, board policy development. Let's see. So this looks like it's policy updates. All right, let's see.
And with this one, all of the policy updates have been reviewed, adoption of press as well as legal reviewed. And so the changes that, in our adoption, a full adoption of a press has been reviewed by our legal, so just wanted to note that
Oh,
as
so
well.
legal
Yes.
has reviewed these changes. Okay. So, so I'm looking under policy development, that first page. And so we're not adopting unless the policy is appropriate for consent agenda part of that statement? Am I misinterpreting? So press doesn't ask for it to be in there, but we're adding it in. So where is that language coming from? Is that legal or is it
Yes, that would be
Yes,
illegal.
legal. That
legal
was
saying that?
legal.
Okay. And so what, consent agenda, so does this mean that if there's a policy change or a suggestion to a policy change that is appropriate for consent agenda or necessary or prudent to meet emergency or special conditions, it still goes to the board for discussion and vote?
Absolutely,
Okay.
yes.
Yeah, so it's important for the community to know. That doesn't mean that it automatically goes to consent. If it's a emergency or special condition that were to be legally compliant, that's a discussion that happens at a public board meeting, that the community would be able to participate at, as far as watching and watching it live. Beth, anything? Jim? No? Thoughts?
Just seems to be laying out procedural,
Yep.
which goes in line with our policy, schedule of policy meetings and review, and
Yeah.
seems to be a good time to be reviewing this policy.
Yep, agree, definitely agree. Okay. Agreed, Mrs. Hostler, moving it forward to consent?
Yes.
Same here. Anything there?
Nope,
Okay.
that's good.
All right, moving on to 260. Okay, so I think the only thing that happened here is that Mrs. Redmond's name was updated to Mrs. Romeos's. Is that
Correct.
The only thing?
There's no substantive change to the policy,
Great,
just the complaint.
This one was
manager.
recently reviewed.
yeah. Anything, Mrs. Hostler?
Nope.
Anything else?
And that name change was due to Ms. Redmond no longer
Redmond's,
being
yep.
employed by District
Yes,
205.
right.
I just want-
Living life on the West Coast. Okay, Mrs. Hostler, yes, move to consent. Same here. Moving on to 330, chain of command.
This is actually in reference to what you've stated prior. This policy has been in place, it's up for a 5-year review. We're fully adopting, and we've also operationalized that by putting that procedure in place as well as communicating that to our community members.
Yeah, this is, there's a lot that you've done since you've been here, Dr. Campbell, but this, as a lifelong government employee, this is one of my favorite things, chain of command. So I think it's important, and I'm glad that the policy is being updated and that we are adhering to it in the district. I think it's important for the community to know exactly how to get the information, and how to get it is to go to the right person the first time. So I think this is great that this review came at this time.
Yeah, and making it easy for the community to find that information so they know where to go. So that, things can be addressed in a timely manner. So I agree. I like the chain of command.
All right, any further discussion? All right, Mrs. Hostler, yes to move forward to consent?
Yes.
Same here. All right, policy 420, the fund balance. So I'm just gonna start by saying, just gonna state my opinion on this I feel strongly that this policy shouldn't move forward at this time. I feel like right now, our district has so many, I always mess up these phrases, and everybody that knows me will laugh. I was gonna say eggs up in the air, but I'm pretty sure it's balls in the air. Eggs in the basket, balls in the air. That's a laugh for everybody that knows how badly I do that. Between all the facilities projects we have going on, between the outstanding bids that are out there that we still have not seen the final numbers on, between the demographic study that has not come back yet, between all the, I anticipate resource requests, staffing requests, strategic planning that has to happen for us to make up the learning loss and close the achievement gap that we have seen in the last 12 to 18 months. I feel very uncomfortable recommending an adoption to this policy at this time. Now, that doesn't mean, in my opinion, that a year from now, when some of these questions are more solidified, issues are more solidified, and that we have a better understanding of what we need moving forward, that we shouldn't take another look at this. But just from a where we're at right now position, I feel very strongly about any adaptation to this policy. So I will ask Mrs. Hostler, and we'll open it up for comments. I just wanted to put that out there for everybody to understand where I'm coming from.
I do agree that when we're looking at a policy like this, the best way to do it is to have all of the information possible in order to decide what's best for our district. Right this second, I just feel like we're in this limbo of COVID, things that are happening because of COVID, with staffing, with our construction projects, with resource costs and things like that. I just feel like it's just a tough time to assess this policy at this time. I think that it would be, like you said, maybe a year from now, but things change day by day, so we never know when that's going to be, that things will settle and we'll have more information. But we are also waiting on a demographic study, we're waiting on bids, we're waiting on some other things so that we can make other decisions that have financial ramifications as a board. So I feel the same way, that it's just a tough time to make this decision.
And like I said, I think this is why we are reviewing these policies, right? Like, this is why it's important to continuously, and that's why we're doing the quarterly meetings now consistently, because things do change. It's rapidly changing world. It's a fluid situation. So certainly we are not opposed to reviewing this policy in the near future or in a year from now, but I think at this time, I'm uncomfortable. Any discussion from the floor?
So the board approved an accounting change. The current policy is inconsistent with that accounting change. So if you're going to defer the new policy for a year, I heartily recommend that the board approve to go back to our old accounting system, because you are completely inconsistent with our new accounting system.
Well, I think what this policy does, and I'm sure Mr. Welton will correct me when I'm wrong, is that it discusses the amount of our fund balance and where we should be at different points, low points, high points, May 31st, June 1st, or June 30th. I don't think, well, I think it is short-sighted, in my opinion, to make a change to our policy at this time. I don't think it, in my opinion, we are not in direct violation of the new accounting system we approved. But again, I'm sure somebody smarter than me will explain why I'm wrong.
I think there's two pieces of it. There's the accounting change and the date change, looking at the cash flow at the low point of the year. That's one piece of it. And then it's changing the percentage of the fund balance, the range as well. I have no problem with looking at that range and looking at what happens when we're reaching the low point and the high point of that range. It's just changing that range right now that I think the timing is off on. So maybe, I don't know, maybe
Yeah, I mean, maybe.
Chris could speak to that a
Yeah,
little
maybe,
bit
and maybe
more.
it's the wording, because I do like the part about whatever we decide the range to be. If we're above it, how shall we spend it? And if we're below it, how do we get back to that range, right? Like, so I appreciate that paragraph about it, and I think that's an important addition. But I do not feel comfortable with recommending this range, and with all the different unknowns right now with our financial situations, meaning facilities and resources that we may need for student growth.
And it may be the right range when we look at the policy again,
Right.
but I just feel like it's hard to know that right now.
Agreed.
Just for my understanding and learning, when this policy has not been reviewed since 2012, and when was the accounting structure changed?
Yes, the accounting change occurred for the June 30th of 2020 audit.
Okay.
So this policy is referring to July 1st or June 30th audit. So yes, I mean, I agree with Jim that the current policy doesn't make sense with our accounting change. In that it says the board must unanimously agree to authorize fund balances of less than 10%. When fund balances are below 26%, the board shall adopt a multi-year financial plan that addresses liquidity risks and restores fund balances to desired levels over a reasonable period of time. And we're below it with the accounting change. We're below 26%. We're at about 10. So this policy should probably be addressed sooner than a year. Should probably be addressed, but I agree also that there are a bunch of unknowns with the bids, in particular the bids and the demographic study and financial projections. So we should probably address this policy at some point after we have a better idea about those things.
What's our next policy meeting date? I just don't have that on.
February, I don't-
February.
I believe we're looking at February 1st. We originally had March, but because we're trying to catch up,
Yeah, right.
it's projected.
And then we have another policy meeting this year after that, correct?
Yes,
February,
it'll be every
and
3
it'll be
months.
Every 3 months. So
Yep.
we have
So we'll do
two other
February and
opportunities
then, well,
this year
May.
to assess if that information
That's
is more complete.
And I do think February will give us a clear understanding of where our bids are, where our demographics are, and where our money should be. I mean, I'll just end there, so.
So until then, if you're going to be consistent with our old policy, the board needs to discuss cutting the budget to get our budget within the current policy.
Well, it's certainly not budget cut time, but I mean, I think February would still work with if we adjusted the policy at that time.
Well, that's where I would feel more comfortable making those kind of decisions. I think we'll have more information, fact-based decision-making can happen then, where I don't feel like we can now.
And it doesn't have to be our old policy or this policy.
Right.
You know, maybe at that time,
Right.
there's, might be recommendations that are somewhere in between those two, so.
The Finance Committee reviewed this policy and sent it to the Policy Committee with the Finance Committee's approval that this was an appropriate policy for us.
Well, again, it sounds like to me, and I know Mrs. Arbanidis is not here, but it sounds like both Mrs. Hustler and I agree that this should be tabled until February. So I think that's where I feel comfortable. And so I won't speak for you, but Mrs. Hustler, what would you like to do?
I think that at that time, we just didn't know that we were going to be in the state that we're in as far as what's happening with construction costs and enrollment and things like that. So I think that we just didn't know that we weren't going to yet have all of the information in order to make a good, solid decision on this as a board. So I think that in order to really do the best job we can in deciding exactly what this policy should look like, I just feel like having those pieces it's very important for us to have all of those pieces of information, which hopefully we will have in the near future.
So, Chris, the attachment to the chart, the operating cash flow low point ratio. So as of May 31st, are we at 27.53%? Is that what this chart shows? Where are we at, I should say?
Yes, May 31st is 27.53%. I'm sorry, I had my mic off. Yes, May 31st, 27.53%.
So then as it stands right now, with the cash low point, and that is our cash low point,
It is.
so we would not be in violation of where we stand right now at no less than 26%. Am I interpreting that correctly?
No,
Okay,
this,
that's why I asked the questions.
the proposed policy is between 5 to 15, and this is at 27.53, so it would be above the range.
No, but I'm asking what our current policy is.
Current policy is not May 31st, it's the June 30th, which was at about 10% with the new accounting deferring the June taxes.
So how many other districts moved to, you know what, I'm not even gonna take that back. Okay,
So there's a
Yeah.
date,
the date change is making
right?
this very
So I do agree that as soon as we have that information, it would be good to look at this again so that we can make whatever changes need to be made so that we are in alignment with the policy.
Yep. I mean, I think 5% is way too low, no matter what, if it's the low point, it's just way too low in my mind. And it's not something I would ever feel comfortable with, but, I think that once we have what those numbers are moving forward by February, that we can take another peek at this. But I do agree that there's definitely parts of this suggested change that, I think are important about what to do when we have too much and what to do when we don't. So my recommendation would be not push it forward at this time. Mrs. Hausler?
Well, I think, like I said, I do think the changes are necessary to be in alignment, but having all of the information in order to make the policy complete is also very important. So if we were just making a date change tonight, I'd be okay with that, but we're not. We're looking at other pieces of it, and we don't have the information, as far as I'm concerned, to be able to make that decision. So I would recommend that we look at this again at our next policy meeting.
Sounds good. All right, next policy is 4180. The new pandemic preparedness management and recovery. Now, this is a new policy. I do see, who's gonna
Dr.
talk to it?
Kranz.
Dr. Kranz?
So this is a policy, I believe, that existed prior to the COVID-19 pandemic. We did not have this policy on file. It sets forth guidance items as it relates to necessary learning for school administration, as well as the differentiation of power and necessary reviews of plans. It also discusses emergency school closing and the rationale behind who would be making that closing, as well as information related to remote and blended learning days and the adoption of those days in the event of a pandemic.
So this policy did not exist before, brand new to our policy manual. The adoption of this policy, does it require us to close schools if the governor tells us to close schools? Do you have a health?
I think that the state will require that regardless of a policy on file. What this policy does is it sets forth what the necessary preparedness steps would be, not just related to the closing, but related to board meeting procedures, payment of services for staff, and ensures that continuity continues within the district and sets forth, where and how that determination will be made.
So this is more like, if it does happen, this is what will occur.
Correct. This is what the district will do.
Right. Okay, perfect. Better language. Mrs. Hausler, anything?
This
from-
was also reviewed by our
Legal reviewed
our
this as
legal.
well?
Mhm.
Okay.
Yes, because of being new for our district.
Did they make updates compared to what press?
They did. They actually narrowed it, thanks to several of our concerns. There were several other entities that were.
Because I'm looking at this 6-page
Yeah.
press update,
yeah.
our press, and ours
There were
is 2
originally-
pages.
Right, there were several other entities that were included in recommendations from press about who could actually make recommendations to the superintendent to close schools, including the local health department, the state health department, those sorts of entities. And the attorney said that's not necessary to include in our press, or into our policy.
I want to emphasize as well that it calls for the development of a plan for addressing any needs should they develop, and specifically states, and I'll read this verbatim, the initial plan and subsequent substantive modifications shall be approved by the board. I think that's important to share so that you understand, the local control that is there in terms of modifying and approving that plan.
So in many other school districts in the area where this policy was already in place, it was actually originally called the H1N1 pandemic preparedness policy.
Before the Spanish
before
flu.
this. I'm sure that it was. The return to learn or reopening plan or whatever referred to this specific policy as how that was done and why this was done and things that they were doing. They referred specifically to this policy. So
Yeah, I think, and after coming from where we were, back before the pandemic and kind of, in hindsight, blindsided by what we should have in place, I think this policy is really important for our families to know what they can expect if we, God forbid, ever get to that point again. And I do think that's one point that I like about this policy. And the other point is that this doesn't mean that we're closing schools. Doesn't mean, it means that if that happens, this is what will happen. Like the superintendent will present a plan to the board that will be discussed. And if that plan is approved, then this is what you can expect for learning for our students during that time. Mrs. Hausler?
Yeah, it's a framework for
Yep.
this
Great
type
word.
of situation, and it's important to have, so.
Great. Any further discussion?
As you recall, in July of 2020, that then superintendent brought to the board a plan that delegated responsibility exclusively to the superintendent with subsequent board approval. That didn't bode well with the community when it was put in practice, and this policy essentially has the same plan.
Well, if I recall correctly, and the older I get, I believe that the policy that the agreement in place at that time was that the superintendent had the ability. We approved the original plan, the board, but the superintendent had the ability to pivot if necessary in extreme circumstances.
Isn't that what this says?
Well, no, this says that the plan is presented to the board. The initial plan and subsequent modifications shall be approved by the board. It does say interim modifications will be approved and implemented with the board, in consultation with the board president, followed by reporting to the board, followed by ratifications of those actions.
Right, I would suggest that before those changes are implemented, that they're brought to the board.
I think that's the way I do read it.
That's the way I read it as well. Yep.
Let me see here. The initial plan and subsequent substantive modifications shall be approved by the board. Interim modifications may be made and implemented by the superintendent in consultation with the board president,
Well, and
followed by reporting to the board for ratification. So
I think it falls on, what we consider substantive, as to what that locus of control is. And I think that the regular monitoring that would occur by the board would hopefully, eliminate any sort of massive change. I think number 2 is also important, the formation of a pandemic planning team consisting of district personnel, members of the community such as health experts, and the identification of priorities. I mean, these are things that I think we wrestled through over the last year, and this spells out the need to make sure that we do them well. Forbid we ever have to do it again.
I'm just pointing out that when we had something extremely similar, it didn't bode well with the community, and I'm just pointing it out
Sure.
so that the board doesn't make the same mistake twice.
Yeah, no, I think it's a valid point, Jim. I also wrestle with the fact that in a true emergency, I think, we are delegating the authority to the superintendent to make an emergency decision. Emergency, and that's interim modifications in an emergency situation, not, and they're small, what's the word they use? Let's see.
Courtney, with all due respect, I believe you added the words emergency situation. I don't see those words in the policy.
Well,
I think the things that I think of are day-to-day operational things that, that need to be taken care of quickly without being
time.
able to wait for a board meeting. And I think we had something like that in place more recently, but there was a consultation with the board, because sometimes there are decisions that need to be made that have to be made before board meeting, right?
Well, and I think that's why it says that these interim modifications are made in consultation with the board president, right? So it's not a sole decision of the superintendent, it's with consultation of the board president. And then that's followed up by the board ratifying the changes, any changes.
But I understand what you're saying, Jim. Maybe, I'm sorry, my mic is not on. I understand what you're saying. Maybe it's in the phrasing and the way it's worded, and
Thank you, Beth. Maybe it should say the plan gets approved by the board before it's implemented.
Say that again, Jim. I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
Maybe the phrasing should include that the subsequent substantive modifications shall be approved by the board for ratification before implementation.
but it does say that.
It does say it has to,
It has to be approved by the
Approved.
board. The initial plan and subsequent
The way I read that is a retroactive approval.
well, the interim modifications is the retroactive after consultation with the board president. The initial and subsequent substantive modifications are approved by the board.
That is correct. And so it's the subsequent substantive modifications that I was discussing.
Right, but that says they shall be
Shall be
approved by the board.
I believe, the way I read it implied there is that is a retroactive approval.
But we don't,
Yeah, and I'm not interpreting it that way. I think there's two sentences here. Initial plan and substantive modifications shall be approved by the board. And then there's a second sentence, which is where I kind of think the wording could be cleaned up. Interim modifications may be made and implemented by the superintendent in consultation with the board president, followed by ratification of the board. So that's the sentence that gives the superintendent, with consultation of the board president, authority to change the plan that had already been approved.
And that's the sentence I'm talking about.
Okay, so that's what I was trying to get to.
Right.
Because you kept saying substantive
So that's
modifications.
Right, so that's a retroactive approval.
Right, the second sentence is, but, okay,
After the initial plan has been approved by the
and
board.
subsequent substantive modifications, right. I will just say I'm comfortable with it, giving, Jim, was there any, because you're a better history reteller than I am, were there any changes July that were not approved by the board? That the superintendent was given permission or,
The
authority to
community,
do?
the community expressed their displeasure with the idea of delegating so much authority to the superintendent away from the board.
So, okay.
but this is
But
different
what was there?
from,
Were there any changes? That's what I'm trying to remember. I don't recall any, but I would defer to your memory, which is definitely better than mine.
I can't give you any specific examples of changes, but wasn't the issue. The issue was the board delegating so much of its authority to the superintendent.
And I think with this policy, it's not. I think it's only delegating interim modifications, which must then be ratified by the board. Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah, that's why I said interim, which then
Retroactively.
must be. That's retro. I get that.
Retroactively after they're
Yep,
implemented.
I get that, but they're interim, so that's, we have the plan, substantial ones, so we approve the plan, substantial changes we approve. If there are interim, smaller changes that have to take place, then the superintendent in consultation with the board president is given the authority to make those changes, which even those changes would then retroactively have to be approved.
I am only respectfully trying to give you my opinion so the
Yeah,
board
no, I
doesn't
appreciate
make
it.
the same mistake twice.
So the wording I think you're referring to, Jim, was from our original plan at the very beginning of our very first pandemic preparedness plan as a district. That was, the wording in that was very different from this. As we move forward, some of that changed. So I think this is more in alignment with what we changed it to. So things were not voted on. The substantive changes were not approved by the board in that original plan, whereas they are here. And I think that interim modifications, I'm okay with talking about, if there's other wording or, or if there's something that being recommended here to look into. But the interim modifications may be made and implemented by the superintendent in consultation with the board president, followed by reporting to the board for ratification. I mean, I don't think there's an assumption there that the modification would be made and then consultation with the board president and the board would take place. I don't think it reads that way. So I think it's probably just semantics and the way, maybe just cleaning that up a little bit so that everyone feels comfortable with it. Is that something that?
All I'm trying to articulate is that I would highly encourage the board to approve changes proactively rather than retroactively.
If I can add, I believe where it states the initial plan and subsequent substantive changes, I believe that whole paragraph in red was added by legal. I don't have the specific documents.
So just,
Dr. Rubenstein.
just to be clear about a couple of things. So really, if we rewind to last year, unfortunately, so the board approved a plan on July 7th of 2020. That was like a 38-page document, really, really long, about how we were going to do that. There were minor changes. The board then approved a really big change in August because we were going to delay the opening of school. That was not done without the board. There was a change to the metrics in November. That was not done without the board. That was done with the board approval. There was a change to hybrid schedules. That was done with board approval, right? So all of those big substantive changes, there were minor changes along the way, but the board president at the time was certainly involved in conversations along the way, as far as I know. What this is doing is codifying exactly what I just talked about. And to further that conversation, now that Dr. Campbell is here, every week you guys are getting an update on what's going on, and our community is getting an update on what's going on related to the pandemic as it has continued. And we are continuing to push out information about any even minor update that we're getting from the State Board of Health or from the governor's office or from whoever about changes to whatever. And if there is a substantial change that needs to be made to the plan, then we're making that. You're making that.
I guess the only thing else that I could possibly add is that when writing policy by its very essence, transcends administrations. And when writing policy, I would think you'd be well advised to assume the worst instead of what you presently have, so that the board maintains control if the worst should ever occur. You can't assume we have our present wonderful, reasonable, logical administration in place.
I think that, if I am correct, what Mr. Collins is referring to is more wording within the policy that will be in place until it's assessed again, and not by what is happening currently with I don't think there's any question that,
Right.
that we are in consultation and that things have been approved by the board
Yeah,
at this time.
because-
So I think probably what you're referring to more is just the on-paper policy,
Right.
the way it's
The process of
phrased.
changing policy, as you know, obviously takes a long time. So if you're in a situation that is unforeseen, the board's changed 2 times, no one remembers this policy, but now they have to find it and pull it out. And the board wants to wrest control, they would have to go through the months-long process of changing the policy.
Well, I actually don't agree that it has to be a month-long policy, months-long process. If there was a policy that needed to be changed, we just pushed forward a policy that said that we could bring it directly to the board. I don't know which one that was. One of the ones we just talked about. Yeah,
Yeah.
right, so.
Because it needed to be
Right,
changed.
it could be at the next board meeting, which could be called within 48 hours. So I don't think it's a 3-month process that has to be adhered to. So, I think we obviously need this policy. It's a brand-new policy that we never adopted before. It's been in existence since, God knows, let's see.
Yeah, this is the second time.
It was reviewed twice, right?
I think it goes back to 2008. at least.
2008. Yeah, thank you, Dr. Renz.
I personally am comfortable with the way that the policy is worded, because I do think that the way it's worded, it's doing what you would like to be stated. I think it's just a interpretation.
Yep.
So
And
I
am
guess advise me.
Yeah, and I
on-
am interpreting it the way that you're reading it, that it is,
It does involve the board in those
Yep.
Large and small decisions.
okay, good.
So
Anybody else? Any more further discussion?
The only thing I would add, just, in the spirit of, consensus, is that the development of the plan, would be an opportunity to articulate some of this further. Like Kevin mentioned, Dr. Rubenstein mentioned, there's the long document that was built, and that would be a possible opportunity for, further definition of what is considered substantive and what's considered, interim
That's a good
modification.
point,
Might
Scott,
might
yeah.
be an opportunity there. So I just want to surface that.
Yeah,
that's a good point. And I know some of those things were different items were outlined that way in that original plan. So that's a good point.
okay, Mrs. Hostler, moving to consent.
Yes.
Same here, move to consent. Next policy, 5180. Oh, wait, I'm sorry, did I do it wrong?
I think it's 5.
510, sorry, mine are out of order, 510. Okay, 5.
You said don't confuse me.
Okay, so this is equal opportunity employment, and it looks like it's a 5-year press review, policy, legal, and cross-reference updates.
Yes,
Mr.
so on this one, in the first paragraph under equal employment opportunities, it just provides an update on there to include conviction record unless authorized by law. And it changes, it removes the word pilot from the Compassionate Use of Medical Cannabis Pilot Program Act because it is no longer a pilot. It also just updates the complaint manager again in this policy. So those are the only changes.
So minor adjustments.
Yes.
Any discussion? Okay, Mrs. Hostler, move forward to consent. Same. Moving on to 5:30, hiring process and criteria. Looks like another 5-year press review, policy, legal, and cross-reference updates.
Correct?
Mr. Pavone?
Yes, and what this does, there's no substantive change to this. It just updates the language. It just phrases the terminology where the superintendent is responsible for recruiting personnel and making hiring recommendations to the board. And it just removes older language on there.
I think it's just more clear.
Yep,
The way
it
that
does
it's written this
clarify a
way.
lot of roles and responsibilities in there. Okay, any discussion? Mrs. Hostler, 5:30 to consent,
Yes.
same. All right, now 5:180. I just, you know what, you're writing, like I had so many notes, so all right, so this is the, let's see, temporary illness or temporary incapacity, policy and legal reference updates.
Right, and this one we did have a legal review on also, and what this does, this limits the amount of time off that a staff member that is not affiliated with the union can take off. So in essence, what it is, it limits any potential abuse of leaves for individuals. They're afforded the leave that's provided to them by law, but not able to string leaves together consecutively on there. So it just maintains that. And this is the exact language that they're proposing in here. That's in the PSRP collective bargaining agreement.
Great, so this is non-union employees and
Non-union.
PSRP employees would have the exact same.
They would.
Requirement, okay.
Yes.
Any discussion? All right, Mrs. Hostler, move to consent,
Yes.
same. All right, 6:20. School year calendar and day. Let's see, legal and cross-reference updates.
So on this, it's just one small change. We're moving to accept the press policy. There was the update to ensure the minimum of 176 days where our policy stated 177. So it's just a minor change to update to the press policy of the minimum 176 actual student attendance days.
And so, Kathy, with that updated on what we're going to change our policy to reflect?
It still shows 177, but that was up for discussion because it was a question
Right,
that
so
someone
that-
had
but
asked.
that's
So
what
if
the
we
red
want
line
to change it to 176,
Yep,
we
yep,
can.
It'll be updated to,
Consistent with press.
Yes.
Yep. Any discussion? Okay. Mrs. Hostler to consent,
yes.
and same here, and then just Kathy, just make sure that gets corrected, thank you. 6:30, organization, 6:30, organization of instruction, why am I not on? So this looks like it's a policy review and cross-reference update. And Dr. Rubenstein, are you going to speak to this one? Or Dr. Grund?
So the main points, the main points in this are some semantic items related to the use of pre-K, and we typically use the phrase early childhood to refer to Madison Early Childhood Center. We've also added in the transition center instead of through 12th grade, just to make sure it encompasses the broad range of programs here. And then also some adjustment to accommodate and address the full-day kindergarten, now that our all-day kindergarten program is continuing to grow, as well as some clarification related to students in varying grade level designations. So students being able to, help me, Kevin, accelerate beyond the grade level.
Those changes.
Okay, any discussion?
Nope.
Any discussion? Okay. Mrs. Hausler, move to consent.
Yes.
Same. All right, 640, curriculum development. This is a policy review, legal and cross-reference updates.
There's-
Dr. Dr.
Yeah, I think Dr. Grins and I will tag team, but I do want to start out so that we can clarify some things with this particular policy because there was a section that specifically made reference to single gender classes and activities. And so what I want to clarify is that since Title IX has been passed and is now law, there are very specific guidelines in order to actually separate students due to their gender under the Title IX law that was passed. So this policy in no way is creating opportunities for us to increase single sex, but they're saying because of Title IX, in those situations that does occur, if and when it would occur, that there is a policy in place. I will give you an example. So currently with for example, in our health education, our fifth graders attend Candor that speaks to their health and the development. And so in those situations, when they go to Candor with our fifth graders, they would separate and have talk to the boys specifically about things that are specific to the development of the boys through their adolescence and maturation. And then they will have a separate conversation with the girls, right? So that's an example, but because of Title IX, we now can say that conversation, and I'm sure there are several parents, me being a parent of girls, are not necessarily wanting to hear and be included in certain things that might be in those conversations a little bit more specific to gender. So that's an example of that. But let me be clear, there are no plans to, because I know that there was some question about that. Like, give me some examples of when you're going to go into specific gender. There are no plans, and no specific plans to add additions to any single gender classes or activities or related to curriculum. We are recommending that we adopt press policy. That's what we're doing. We're recommending we adopt press policy. So in those situations like the Candor physical education courses, there has also been a situation where, for example, where we've had the title of the class is Dr. Rubenstein. It was a girl. We made some updates to even the language.
Yeah,
the board
just adopted updates to the curriculum with boys and girls choir
There we
and
go.
those sorts of things.
There you go.
So like Title IX, when the regulations were recently adopted in 2020, it outlawed all of those sorts of things. Even, like a boys and girls scholarship and that sort of thing, unless a board or a state adopts a more specific policy. So the board can adopt a more specific policy, and then you can have all those things go on. And that's why the board's adopting those policies. And we've adopted every other policy related to Title IX with our employment and with our students and all of those other sorts of things. This is like the last of the piece that has not been updated.
So the takeaway for the older parents, myself included, Candor for older parents used to be
Robert
called
Crown.
Robert
Robert
Crown
Crown.
for clarification for
Okay,
community.
yeah.
I was like Candor, but that used to
Robert
be
Crown.
called Robert Crown.
That's correct.
So the takeaways here is that this is the final piece of our compliance with Title IX.
and the law.
And the law for
Yes.
that 205 has no plans to investigate or research single gender classes or curriculum or classrooms or any such pathway to that. Is that clear?
That is correct.
And that's correct. Okay, great.
Yes.
All right, so Dr. Grants, is there anything else?
Anything else? I'm sorry, Dr.
In this
Grants, I wanted to just
policy-
kind of clarify that off the bat.
No, I appreciate
wanna
it.
think
I
Jump
appreciate
in.
it.
That's helpful. No, it
I
also
guess
just
my one
furthers-
question, Dr. Grant, sorry to interrupt you, is that and it says something, it addresses experimental education or pilot programs that have exceeded a year. Do we have any of those in the district?
We do not currently have any that have exceeded a
Okay.
year. I just wanted to add, it also articulates the need for the curriculum to align to Illinois state learning standards. And it states that clearly up top, which I think is a good further delineation in comparison to what we have now, which says it, but just does not say it as clearly.
Okay. So any further discussion on this policy? Mrs. Hauser? Okay.
Nope.
Mrs. Hauser, do you recommend moving to consent?
Yes.
I do as well. 640 goes to consent. Next policy, 665, student social and emotional development, a policy review, legal and cross-reference updates. Dr. Rubenstein?
So it's all that it is.
It's all what?
That's all that it is.
I knew that.
Just a cross-reference.
Correct.
Update.
All right, any discussions regarding this? Okay. Mrs. Hostler moved to consent.
Yes.
Same. 6100, using animals in the educational program. Dr. Granz.
This, if I can bring it up here, this brings you back to the days of dissecting
When
animals.
I saw this, I thought the same exact thing.
Which is an amazingly nostalgic experience. It just talks about the ability, it eliminates a line regarding participation in that process, but still allows for students to, opt out should they need to.
Right, because the paragraph above it identifies that they may opt out and will not be penalized, correct?
Correct.
And be offered an alternative.
Yep. Without penalty. Okay. Any further discussion?
Nope.
Mrs. Hostler to consent?
Yes.
Same. 100 goes to consent. 6145, migrant students, press 5-year review policy and legal reference updates. Dr. Rubenstein?
Right. This is a regular five-year review from Press and makes it consistent with federal law.
Okay. Mrs. Hostler, any discussion regarding this? Okay, Mrs. Hostler, move to consent.
Yes.
Same, 145 goes to consent. So I did
616.
I just, hold on 1 second. I want to make sure. Okay. So I failed to bring my copy. It's 80, correct? I skipped over 80. Sorry, my fault. So
Oh, that's,
That's
yeah,
okay.
that'd be
Yep.
great. Thank you.
680 is the teaching about controversial items.
Yeah, so-
Issues, sorry.
Yeah, issues. That's okay. So this policy, we want to recommend that we adopt Press's policy as written, which gives states very clearly as it relates to teaching of controversial issues.
So what we are adopting is the press version of this policy.
Correct.
And it updates our policy that has not
Not-
been revised since September of
2018.
That is correct. So that, as it relates to any school-sponsored presentations or any discussions, that those discussions, as well as any guest speakers that are brought in, are age-appropriate and consistent. I think one of the things that we wanted to highlight, that it's consistent with the curriculum and serves an educational purpose, informative, and presents a balanced view, respectful of the rights and the opinions of everyone, and obviously setting some boundaries in terms of not tolerating the profanity and the slang. So I'm recommending that we adopt PRESP as written.
Okay, any discussion?
No, just that it's good to review the policy and that it just seems to make it a little bit more clear. Minor wording changes, but yeah, I agree.
I think clarity is always important. It provides,
It's good for everyone. I mean, to know exactly what the boundaries are.
and let the curriculum, and I like the, consistent with the curriculum.
And serve the educational purpose. I mean, that
That is the goal, and the curriculums are approved prior to the semester and prior to the implementation of the class. So I think this is really consistent with what this board has talked about and what this district feels is our priorities.
I agree.
Any further discussion?
okay. Moving 680 to consent, Mrs. Hausler.
Same? Okay. Going, no, what did I do with my cheat sheet? That's okay, my fault. 6160, English learners.
This is a policy update. It looks like
Ariana review.
Ariana, Ms. Leonard reviewed. See anything?
This is, actually, if you want, I can take it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This one is just one inclusion under parent involvement, that they are able to participate and serve on the district's transitional bilingual educational program parent advisory committee.
Yeah, which is amazing.
Yes.
Yep.
So they just added that under parent involvement.
Great.
And I totally forgot, I apologize right now.
Could we please,
Have someone look at the website and update that, the BPAC? Because it's a little outdated with current people, and I think I don't remember the year now when I looked at this, but yeah, I love this committee. It's so important to the community, and the collaboration of the parents with the district has been, we've been present when they've come and present to the board before, and weren't many of them just given
Yep.
what was it?
Is
Didn't
that
they
the
just
same
get
group?
a
A
certificate?
recognition, yeah.
Yeah,
Recognition,
Yep, no,
Yep.
yeah, so I love this committee, and so, yeah, so if somebody could just peek, I'm sorry, I forgot to ask you that. All right, so English learners, any further discussion? No, Mrs. Hostler moved to consent? Yes. Same. 6170, Title I programs, it's a press 5-year review and cross-reference updates. Dr. Rubenstein?
This was a regular 5-year update, and the only thing that is added is that we are required by law to have these district and school level parent and family engagement compacts, and we have those, and it's incorporated into there.
So everything's required by law we already have, correct?
Correct.
Great.
Just noting it in the
Yep,
policy.
updating it. Okay, any discussion?
None. Not for me.
All right, Mrs. Hostler moved to consent,
Yes.
same. Moving on to 190. Extracurricular and co-curricular activities,
I can take this.
policy review and updates.
There's a removal of text in the beginning, some redundancies regarding the description of an extracurricular activity. More importantly is the clarity regarding academic standing and the need for students to be in academic standing in order to participate. These are things like the eligibility lists that we utilize at York High School specifically as it relates to IHSA sports and the necessary credits that students need, as well as the grade verification during the week. That's the main point that I see.
I'm gonna ask the historian in the group, Jim, like, was there a reason that the extracurricular and co-curricular activities were defined like they were in our policy? Because it's a pretty specific,
I
what they
think
include and don't include.
I think the Illinois Association of School Boards came up with that.
Okay, so,
Yeah, that
All right.
seems kind of odd.
yeah, it just seems kind of odd. All right,
Good, remove that.
And
And
you just-
then these are just standards by IHSA. Is that correct? That schools.
Correct.
Yeah,
Correct. We're
gotcha.
given two options to utilize. The option 2 there is the one that we use.
Okay. Great.
okay. Any further discussion? All right, 190, Mrs. Hostler to consent?
Yes.
Same?
Can I just clarify really quick? So the alternative, number 2, is what we want to continue to put in our policy or to add to our policy. Is that correct, Scott?
Yes.
Yes.
All right, 6-230, Library Media Program, Policy Review and Updates. Dr. Grenz or Dr. Rubenstein?
I can do that. So this is a comprehensive, I think that we had not reviewed this in a really long time, and this makes it
10
really
years.
consistent with what library media programs are actually supposed to be doing. And so really modernizes it, the policy, and make sure that, we are actually stating through policy what is actually being done in our schools.
Yeah, the current policy, which is 10 years old, does seem very slim.
Yes.
And it certainly isn't indicative of what our current media centers are doing and what the ones that are being added to all of our buildings will do. Any further discussion? Mrs. Hostler, move to consent?
Yes.
Same. 230 goes to consent. 235, access to electronic networks, 5-year review and legal reference.
This is primarily updates, some of which are more word choice, things like network being referred to internet. A little bit of specificity added with regard to the definition of what constitutes a network itself, with things now obviously growing in terms of internet connectivity. It expands that with a little more definition around what it is and what it is not. We typically have the acceptable use policy that's, signed off by all of our students and staff. This is that very, very similar layout here. I don't think I'm missing any other major changes.
Just clarifying the confidentiality and violations of the use of those things I see at the bottom.
Yep.
Correct.
Okay. Any further discussion regarding this one? 235. Mrs. Hostler, move to consent?
Yes.
Same. 235 goes to consent. 255, assemblies and ceremonies, 5-year review, legal and cross-reference.
I think just legal references are updated on this.
No, no changes at all. Any discussion? Mrs. Hostler, move to consent?
Yes.
255 goes to consent, same. 260, complaints about curriculum, instructional material, and programs, policy, legal, and cross-reference updates. Dr. Grenz.
Some of this is a little bit of just a semantics revision. It does include the curriculum objection form. Should a parent or guardian have an objection to a curriculum item or an instructional material, they can utilize that form rather than proceeding through the uniform grievance procedures. They're both still listed, just in case the situation has a variation to it. The top portion I think is just an adjustment to the text as it relates to policy 715. We already have a very similar policy to this. It's just, I think, a little bit of a rewording and an emphasis on that curriculum objection form.
So Dr. Grenz, could you do the community a favor? And, so I think I've gotten this question before. What's the difference between a uniform grievance procedure and a curriculum objection form? And just to, the efficiency or effectiveness of either and the differences, I think would be helpful for the community to understand.
Sure. So our curriculum objection form is going to be more focused on instructional elements. It might be, it may be a material, maybe a course itself. It might be, actually, Dr. Campbell mentioned Candor, formerly known as Robert Crown. We've had, parents object to that in the past, and that's something that they don't feel they want their child to be involved with at that particular time. And they can object to that, and they can utilize the curriculum objection form and be provided with an alternative area study if it, warrants such, and if that, is approved based on their request.
And that objection form is now going to be included in our policy manual, correct? Is that an exhibit?
It's an exhibit,
Yeah.
Which is available through the principal. The exhibits typically are not provided within the actual policy manual itself.
Right.
But should the complaint come up, it can be accessed through the principal. And the principal is typically going to be the one that initially, receives that and processes that, and then, takes it further should it be needed. Whereas a uniform grievance procedure, I'll let Luke talk more to that.
Sure, and that's just a broader context for if somebody feels like that one of their rights has been violated, then they can file the uniform grievance complaint form.
So the more impactful way to proceed for the parent who does not want their student participating in a specific class at a specific time would be the curriculum objection form. Okay, so it doesn't get lost in the chaos of of the uniform grievance procedure, correct? Correct. Okay, so I just think it's important for the community to understand the difference between the two. All right.
Yeah, just so they can have those things addressed in a timely
right.
manner, similar to the chain of command, just to give them the tools they need to
Right.
discuss any issue with their child with the correct person and move through the channels so that they get some clarification in a timely manner. So that's helpful to explain that. Thank you, Scott.
Yeah, and Luke, thank you. Okay.
Yes.
Any further discussion? Mrs. Hostler, move to consent.
Yes.
Same, 260 goes to consent. Next one is 6290, homework, which looks like policy reviews and update. Dr. Grenz?
This policy has some adjustments as it relates to wording. We felt it was important to emphasize the word developmentally appropriate homework as it relates to the statement developmentally appropriate homework is part of the district's instructional program. We do have different grade levels in which homework is not as much of a role as it may be in other grades. So we wanted to emphasize that and update that as well. I think this policy brings with it future opportunities for us to continue to focus on consistency and alignment as it relates to some of the outcomes from the Thrive D205 initiative. If you can recall, we developed common syllabi structure, looked into opportunities for consistent homework assignments in terms of the duration that might be expected of a student to the extent that we can. I think there are still opportunities for us to continue that work and to focus on that consistency. But the main adjustment here is that addition of the word developmentally appropriate.
So basically to break it down, because it doesn't mean that there's a difference between first grade homework assignments and 10th grade or 12th grade. And that's what that wording helps to clarify, correct?
Correct.
Mrs. Hostler?
Yeah, thank you, Scott. I think that this does a nice job of clarifying the use of homework and making sure that it is beneficial to the student and the parent and the teacher and the reasons that it's assigned. So I do think that number 3, it serves as a communication link between the school and the parents, guardians. I think also the feedback it allows helps students to understand where they're at and where they might need to be working on things more. So I think that just keeping that in mind with that homework policy and how it's applied in the older grades especially is just a good thing to keep in mind to make sure that they are really benefiting from those assignments and that parents might have a look into where the kids are at, if they might, we talked about this a couple board meetings ago about just that homeschool piece and making sure that parents can support their children the best that they can. I think that's one thing that really helps. So, thank you.
Well, I think it's important that this policy reminds us all that homework's not just to have homework, right? There's a purpose to it.
Exactly.
And that purpose has to be one of these bullet points in the policy. And that's what I'd really like to see happening in each of our classes.
Yeah, I just wanted to also underscore what Dr. Grins has shared, that, even looking at after the adoption of this particular policy, looking at ways that we continue to codify and align and ensure that the homework has a very meaningful educational purpose to it and that it is developmentally appropriate is really important. So I think that the adoption of this policy does not come without some continuation in terms of alignment and really looking at our practices as it relates to supporting students in their learning.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any further discussion? All right, 6 to 90. Mrs. Hostler, move to consent.
Yes.
Same. 290 goes to consent. 6315, high school credit for students in grades 7 or 8. Policy review, no updates. Dr. Rubenstein?
There are literally no updates. I think that this was another policy that had not been reviewed in more than 5 years.
Yep.
You asked that we review those policies. We are doing that. And so it has been reviewed. I would recommend its adoption. It's in line with the present policy. There have been no changes to state law. So,
Great. Any, yep.
When I read this policy, it made me think of a couple of things. Now, just to clarify, this policy specifically addresses a 7th or 8th grader who would go over to York High School to take a York High School offered class taught by a York High School teacher. Okay. Do we have a policy that and if I read this policy correctly, tell me if I'm correctly reading it, that the credit for that class would appear on that student's high school transcript with the letter grade that they earned in that class. Is that correct?
yes.
Yeah,
Yep.
academic credit.
Okay. So, a parent told me that their daughter, who went to the University of Illinois, took District 205, 4 years of real language, whatever language that might be. Let's just, for example, say it's Spanish. So they took, I think, 2 years of Spanish or 3 years of Spanish in middle school, got credit for that first year of Spanish, and then started out freshman year at level 2. And then went 2, 3, 4, finished junior year, goes down to the U of I, completes her 4-year degree, and is told she has not met a graduation requirement and cannot graduate because that first year of Spanish was not taken at a high school. So she was required to enroll in level 4 Spanish, and after she hadn't touched Spanish for 4 years. at university level. And it was a surprise. And I'm not that good at world languages, so I could not imagine, after not having been exposed to a world language for 4 years, to have to go in to level 4 and and take that in college. So do we have any kind of a policy that could help alleviate that situation, or a procedure that could alleviate that situation in that case, and actually put that first year of world language on our kids' high school transcripts?
Well, so I will just say, and I think you're exactly right, and I will say that we have discussed this, and it was discussed at a board meeting before I was even on the board, because I can tell you that neither one of my students, my children, 7th grade and sophomore now, have taken world language in middle school. Because when my son, so this is 6 years ago, he was told when selecting his 7th grade courses that world language at middle school would not translate to a credit for a high school because it's not being taught by a high school instructor.
I am encouraged that your child was advised that up front.
Yeah.
So that's great.
Yeah, and that's why he went, and she did too, the Project Lead the Way, and that's when Project Lead the Way was being implemented. And so my kids have not taken world language in middle school, and they start Spanish 1 in high school. So I think what I'm hoping that the difference in this policy is that these students, a 7th and 8th grader, do they have the ability to come over to take Spanish 1?
That is exactly it. That the purpose of this policy is actually for courses like math that we do not offer at the middle school, like a pre-calculus honors ×5, which isn't even a course, but that sort of math class that is not typically offered to an 8th grader or a 7th grader. And where there might be one student at Sandburg Middle School who needs that class. And so we're going to create a special program, and that student's going to be bused over to York High School. And because of the fact that it's going to be a part of their regular program, but there's a whole class of kids at York High School who are taking that pre-calculus class, they're going to get credit for it. It's not designed, this policy is not designed for middle school students who are already taking a world language class to get credit, high school credit for it.
So you're reinforcing exactly
Yeah,
what I was told
exactly.
6 years
That's
ago,
exactly
that
it, yeah.
your middle school students
Yeah.
are not basically going to get a year of, you will
Not.
start in Spanish too, but you still need your 4 years of
Correct.
high school
Correct.
language to get credit at your chosen college.
Correct, yeah.
I will say this, Jim, to your point, because I completely understand what you're saying,
Yeah.
is having just gone through the college application process with one of my kids, is that foreign language requirements at colleges are changing a lot, and a lot of schools are requiring more years of foreign language. So I have a senior, I also have a junior. So some information just came home for him, and there was an addition of clarity to that. But I do think it's nice to hear about these things earlier in middle school as you're making decisions sooner. But there was a lot of information given about making sure to look at the different schools, see what their requirements are as you're choosing your courses for high school, so that because a lot of them just say years. It's not necessarily a level even. So they're all different. It's all over the place, and there isn't really one policy for all of them. So I totally agree with your point that it can sneak up on you as things change like that too. But I do think they're trying to help students look at that ahead
Well,
of time.
I just think
so that
it's a
they-
reminder that when 6th grade parents are preparing, we need to continue to be, because I've gone through it twice now. We've been told you will not get credit, the high school credit. So that's world language where, half the school is taking it.
Yeah,
So they're not going to get the credit. But the one off and the higher level math
That's
kids,
exactly it.
that kid's going to go to York.
Yep.
And he's
Get
going to
credit.
he or she's going to get the credit.
That is exactly
Okay,
it, yeah.
so world language is it's not happening. You're going to need 4 years at the high school.
Yeah, unless, so let's say that there is it could happen in a really, really rare
Okay.
situation where we are looking to offer a very, very unique experience, but it's typically math.
And so those
or-
are case by
that's
case?
Typically a math situation,
Okay.
so, yeah.
I admittedly, at the beginning, said I was going off on a tangent here because
And you were.
I
You didn't
get-
even know
I
you
get-
weren't
I
on a
get
tangent. You were point on.
that the policy addresses, the math prodigy that
That's exactly it.
is taking differential equations and orthogonal functions
Thank you for
in
actually
seventh
seeing
grade.
it.
right?
That's, yes.
Yes, in seventh and
So-
eighth grade.
So, and just because it reminded me, I'm challenging the administration to see if there is a way that, for instance, in the case of that level 1 world language, that, a kid could get high school credit and high school transcript credit for that level 1, even though it was, taken in middle school, which I think would alleviate a lot of confusion for a lot of parents.
Hey, Chris, I think he's recommending staffing increases, because that sounds like a high school teacher going to the middle school to teach world language.
And, I'm just, bringing it up because I think that'd be a great community service. And maybe the answer comes back, no, there's, 64 state laws that don't allow it or whatever. I'm just asking you to look into it because I think it would be a great service for a great many of our students and a great many of our parents. So that was
Yeah, I mean,
my
because
only point.
singularly, I made that decision because I knew moving forward, my children would still have to take 4 years of language, right?
You got good advice,
Yeah,
and
thank
I'm
goodness.
glad you got that
Right,
advice.
right.
Going
And
in.
I want to encourage that we keep giving that advice to
Yeah.
incoming middle school student,
Yeah,
parents.
because there are a lot of parents who want to see their kids placed in as high a level classes as possible, and math is another one of those. If your kid is placed in the highest level of math, they get to York, and there's not a whole lot to take after junior year. And a lot of colleges are saying we're looking at 4 years of math. So you're either taking, the Indiana University class that is specifically designed for business majors. And if your kid's not going to Indiana as a business major, why take the class? So, I just want to point out that I think as a unit district, we have the luxury to be able to think this through from 6th through 12th grade. And I'm just encouraging our administration to do so.
Yeah, I mean, if we have half this, and we're totally getting off policy here, but if we have half this, each middle school taking world language, why not bring a high school teacher over there to teach it so it's an accredited year for them once they get to the high school? Because that's the only thing that's stopping the accreditation.
Right, I think that's exactly correct.
Well, there are just, the kids can go beyond that level at York as well. So for those students who really want to focus on foreign language, taking the middle school brings them to a higher level, which then they can still take 4 years. They just get to a higher level. So you
Yeah,
still have the opportunity to take 4 years. It just brings you to a higher level. and
Yes,
there's
you
some
just
other
have to
things you
take
can do.
AP, whatever it is, your senior year.
There's a Spanish 5, I believe, and some other options, but anyway, that's totally off,
Okay.
but thanks.
So great, thanks this was a good discussion about this, because I think it's important for the community to know that this
Yeah,
is
for sure.
what this policy represents. Mrs. Hostler, move to consent?
Yes.
Same, 315 goes to consent. Next one, 6330. Achievement and rewards, Dr. Rubenstein?
I'm looking at this, so,
Review and updates.
right. I,
So it looks like we're taking out the section about class rank from our policy, which was,
We no longer
which was,
publish
we
it.
no longer
No longer,
publish.
right.
And 10 years ago was the last time this policy was looked at.
correct, yep. And just for the record, if somebody, I talked to the staff at York, if somebody needs to have class rank done, or what have you. There is, like, apparently for some military something, they can do that. It's a very, very rare situation, and this policy would still allow to do that. So,
So it is available if
It's available
a
if
student
needed.
needed it.
exactly.
Okay.
Do you know of high schools that still have class rank?
Not off the top of my head. I mean, there are very, very few that rank still.
I mean, the class rank was eliminated at York about 12 years ago to great public controversy. You know, if you're reviewing your policy every 10 years, you know, I'm sure the administrators in this room won't be happy that I'm about to say this, but maybe you're supposed to revisit class rank. I'm not advocating that we readopt it, but, you know, every decade or so, say, is there a benefit or are we on the right track?
So I think the benefit or the discussion about it would be if this is something that impacts a student's ability and wherever they're applying or, you know, their next step after York, and it doesn't sound like that's a factor that is utilized. But I certainly don't know that yet. College, I'm not at
not
the
something
college
that-
application stage yet.
Not something that we were ever asked for, so.
Okay.
There's parents that have complained that their kid with a 4.0 grade point can't get into the state's flagship academic institution for college. And they advocate that perhaps class rank would help. I don't know if class rank would help those kids or not, but might be worth, you know, talking to some colleges. And just doing a brief survey of other high schools and, you know, public high schools in Northern Illinois and saying, you know, is it a rarity or are, you know, are there a lot of high schools that still have class rank?
I know right off the top of my head that Stevenson and New Trier do not.
Okay.
So,
And I also, am I correct in that our college counselors over at York are in continuous conversation with colleges?
All
and-
over,
Yeah, I
right.
mean, like, crazy, right? And I think maybe that's a question they can add to
Right.
their many.
yep. Even, I mean, just the whole college equation is changing on a, I know this because my nephew just is finishing the college acceptance process, and the whole college equation is changing. I mean, many are test optional and, you know, those sorts of things. And so it just begs the question about what should and should not be required. But, you know, the state still requires that students take the SAT and those sorts of things. So it just, there will be lots of things. And so for a long time, that was required by many schools. And I don't know that there's any school that asks that students be ranked.
But I'm glad to know, unlike the situation that Mr. Collins brought up, if it becomes a indicator that could support a student in any way,
Yep.
there is a way in which that information can be provided to the
Absolutely.
family.
Yep.
Okay. Because that is.
Okay. Mrs. Hausler, 330 to consent?
Yes.
Same, 330 moves to consent. First reading, I always forget to say first reading. All right, next one, 7-20, bus conduct. 5-year review, no updates. Mr. Welton, I know how much you love talking about buses. Anything?
I have nothing.
Yeah, it looks like there's no changes, just a 5-year review. Any discussion? Mrs. Hausler, move to consent.
Yes.
220, same, moves to consent. 230, misconduct by students with disabilities. This also is a 5-year review, no updates. Dr. Rubenstein?
Correct. Misconduct by students with disabilities. It was, yeah, no, there are no updates.
Our policy aligns with press.
Do we have that committee that's described?
So that committee is being combined with, so you will see in May that we are going to be bringing to the board some reviews of handbooks and those sorts of things, and so that will be a part of that.
Yeah, because the way this policy is written, that would imply that this is a board committee and therefore subject to the Open Meetings Act.
That was
School board
kind of
will
confusing
establish
to
and
me. I
maintain a
thought maybe
committee
that
to
was something
open.
that happened in the past.
Right. To develop, implement, and monitor procedures on the use of behavioral interventions for children with disabilities. So that was something that we talked about in the spring with Dr. Yonke. And so
So, is Dr. Rubenstein, Dr. Campbell, is your interpretation of that sentence, the school board will establish and maintain a committee to develop, yada, 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 is that, do you interpret that as a board committee? Or are you interpreting it differently?
So there is,
Or
there,
establish
in
a
another board policy, it outlines what the board committees are and who appoints and who should be on them and those sorts of things. And
I think she's just asking, the way this reads, it's kind of hard to tell.
yeah, and it,
The Board
and
of
it-
Education will establish a committee that is a board committee or a committee
That's what I'm
that is
saying.
not
Is it a board committee or are we just making sure that there's a committee established? That's not a board committee. Because Jim's point is that just like this committee meeting, it's an open public meeting.
So it is technically supposed to be a committee appointed by the board.
So not board led.
No.
If it is a committee appointed by the board, and please bring it to our legal counsel, but that would make it a board committee,
Yeah, that's what
and then subject to the Open Meetings Act. I'm just saying, if you don't want to subject to the Open Meetings Act, you might want to ask our legal counsel to rewrite the policy,
Right.
have it perhaps be a superintendent's committee,
yep.
which would not be subject to the Open Meetings Act.
Yeah, I can't imagine, well. All
Should
right, so
we
let's hold this
hold
one.
this one
Let's
for
pull this
review?
one until we get
Because
some
it
legal
doesn't
review
seem
on
to
it.
be in alignment with what's current practice.
Well, because first of all, is there a committee right now? Or is this one that you were going to bring to us in May to talk about
So
establishing?
first of all, this exact committee is talked about in another board policy.
Okay, do you happen to know which one?
Whichever one talks about board policies, I don't know off the top of my head. So, and it is clearly outlined in there. And so it talks about how the board president can establish committees and appoint people and those sorts of things. And we talked about that when the board reconstituted itself in April, May. So,
But this particular committee is
and
listed.
that committee is listed.
Okay, so we should probably pull that
I am looking,
policy
I'm
as well
guessing it's
for
2150
review next
is what
time.
the committee's policy is. Let's see what we have. Yep. So in policy 2150, there are standing board committees. And one of them is a behavioral interventions committee. Is that what you're referring to, Dr. Rubenstein?
Yep.
Yeah. So this does seem to be a board committee.
So we should review the two policies together.
Well, I think that, this committee says that, this policy says, 2150 says there should be a board policy committee, a parent-teacher advisory committee, and a behavioral interventions committee. That these are standing board committees. So I think that definitely,
that
maybe in
outdated
conjunction with the
policy?
current, this one needs to be reviewed.
We can review that.
Yep.
Let's have legal look at, I pulled that one, policy
2150, which has not been looked at since June of 2016. So I'm wondering why this didn't
Okay.
pop up this time.
Yeah,
Yeah.
That should have popped up in 107 because
Okay.
that would be a 5-year.
because maybe that's just an outdated
No, this one's up.
policy.
Right, that's what
Okay.
I'm saying. It should have popped up in the 5-year
Right,
review.
right. So we should review these together. Pull
Okay.
both of
Yeah.
them for next
So
Okay.
does that make sense, Jim? Yeah, no,
Oh,
it completely makes sense.
I.
Yeah, so let's look at 2150 and 7230 in combination with each other for February. And get some
Okay.
direction from legal maybe, and see if this is aligning with what you were going to bring
Okay.
to us in May. Okay, so we're gonna pull 7230. All right, 7280, communicable, can't believe I got that word out, and chronic infectious disease. Dr. Rubenstein, looks like a 5-year review and legal reference updates,
Which,
280.
right, yep, which changes the order of words in federal law. So.
Oh, the legal, just the
yes,
legal reference,
exactly,
yeah.
the legal references, so.
Okay. Okay,
Just a wording
discussion.
change.
All right, Mrs. Hostler, move to consent.
Yes.
280, same, goes to consent. And our last one, 890, parent organizations and booster clubs.
The last one?
Sure. Sorry.
Sure.
Yep.
Yep.
Chronic.
Provided by law and the Board of Education's policy. Superintendent will develop procedures to safeguard these rights while managing health and safety concerns. I mean, I'm just curious what this policy actually says in terms of how we would impact the student with an infectious disease.
Means that we can't exclude students from school, we can't say you're.
From learning, not from
Right,
physically be
exactly,
present in school.
right, exactly. Like, we can't actually do, the health department has to do that. That's the role of the health department. That's why that policy is in place.
So, I'm just trying to understand this, in that sense, the health department can say you have to keep that kid out of school.
It means the health department can do that.
Health department can do that, but the board or the administration of the school district cannot.
Right, as enumerated by law or board policy.
And it further states down, and I don't know if you see the footnotes on there, that the state or the federal law controls this policy content.
Right, right.
And that the district's role is to have procedures to
Correct.
Provide
to
education.
provide,
Yeah.
you know, education and their rights and privileges by law through the school board's policies and procedures.
Yep.
Yep,
Yeah, yeah.
yep, yep.
All right, 890, parent organization and booster clubs. Dr. Grenz, bringing it in, finishing it up.
Yep. So, we have so many excellent parent organizations, booster involvements here. We saw a few this week in meetings talking about the resources involvement. This provides additional specificity regarding specifically the use of the school district's name and or logos, and where and what constitutes the use of that, as well as additional information regarding the use of their finances and their expenses. And as we mentioned earlier, the board's legal obligation to comply with Title IX as it relates to equal athletic opportunities. And those things were not articulated in that list of 7 that you'll see in the current policy in relation to what we have here in front of us. So it provides those additional clarifications with representation of the board, with the district and parent organizations such as booster clubs.
And are these agreements in place with all of our music boosters?
That's a great question. I believe they are. We have a world-renowned finance department that definitely manages that in the really strict and structured way. We do regularly have liaisons as well that connect with each of those groups to really make sure they're supported and that the work is reaching the students. So I do feel these are all met at the time.
That was my only question. Mrs. Hausler? Any
Answered
further,
my question as well.
yep, any further discussion? I think that's the last one. Okay, so Mrs. Hausler moved 890 to consent.
Yes.
Agreed. 8-90 goes to consent. Let's see here.
Okay, that's the end of the policy discussions. We have anything else that I forgot? Good, good, good. So our upcoming meetings are December 7th, the Finance and Operations Committee Board of Education meeting at 5:30 PM at District 205 Centers, room 215, 16, and 17. And then to December 14th, we have a regular Board of Education meeting at 7 PM at District 205 Center, same, rooms 215, 16, and 17. And on that note, this meeting is adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.